Here's kind of a breakdown of the tools you'll need for the job. For the front suspension, you're going to need a please hammer and I insist hammer. We're going to use an impact, but you can use a ratchet. You need a 21 millimeter for your lug nuts. You're going to need a 19, a 17, and a 14 for your suspension. Loctite and anti-seize, a 10 millimeter, a 14 millimeter, a 15 millimeter, and a 17 millimeter. That should do most of your front suspension. If there's anything we've missed, we're just going to pretend like we did tell you and use it in the video anyway. All right, step one, we're going to drop the sway bar. The impact is nice for this. If not, you're going to need 2 wrenches to hold it. I like the impact because it spin right off. What I like to do, just to break it loose, is I back this up to where the nut is past the end of the stud. I grab a hammer, give it a good tap, knocks it loose. To avoid stretching our ABS line, it's always a good idea to remove this. It gives you a little bit of extra play in it. You may not need it, but you don't want to spend the $95 when you break this to go put a new one in, so you might as well just undo it while you're in here. It's just one 10 millimeter, if you don't have upper control arms, it'll be a 10 millimeter bolt. If you have upper control arms, it'll be a 10 millimeter or 7/16 nut, depending on the brand you used. Next step is these top 14 millimeter bolts. 2 millimeter bolts. There's gonna be 3 of them. One here, one in the back, and one here. After you remove the upper strut bolts, take out the lower shock bolt, which is 19 millimeter. It's just the one nut. This will push out. Not until we relieve pressure off of the strut itself. You'll notice I didn't use a wrench on the other side because the compression of the spring is holding the bolt. Once I undo these lower ball joints, all the stuff is going to give me the play I need to remove it. The next step is to undo your sway bar brackets on both sides. Obviously, we're just showing you one side because the procedure is the same for both, but this is 14 millimeter bolts. They're relatively long, and the impact certainly helps here. Our last step in removal of the old suspension is to drop this lower ball joint. It's 2 19 millimeter bolts. They're Loctited, so they're going to be in there pretty well. Spare parts fall off on their own, don't worry about those. Now that we have both sides disassembled, we're about to start putting that together. It's worth mentioning that if you're doing this at home in your driveway, it is okay to do one side at a time. It isn't going to hurt anything, but you should know, since you're putting a sway bar drop bracket on anyway, you might as well just take the sway bar off so it's not getting in the way, poking a hole in your CV boot, and basically just being a pain. So just go ahead and drop the sway bar. You're removing the bolts anyway, so you might as well just drop it out of your way. And now we're ready to start putting stuff back together, which we'll move on to. You'll notice the indexing mark right here. That shows you that this face is out. Typically, Toytec logo out is how we've always done it, but it's very nice that they machine that in there so you can't get it wrong. All right, the next step is putting in the 3 top bolts for the upper strut mount. And I put anti-seize on these just because when you put high carbon steel into aluminum, you can get galvanic corrosion. It just kind of keeps us from getting seized in here. I don't foresee us having to take it out anytime in the near future, but it's a matter of preference. All right, after securing your upper bolts loosely, I haven't tightened them down yet, you'll put in your lower shock bolt. It goes through from the inside toward the outside, and that's to protect your CV from hitting on the bolt sticking out. Sometimes you have to give a little bit of a wiggle, but it should pop through. And effectively, your new Boss 2.0 aluminum series strut is in place. Once you got the coilover in place and installed, and you've tightened the 3 upper bolts to 14 Ugga-Duggas and the bottom one to 21 Ugga-Duggas, your strut's essentially ready to go. You're going to want to put back together your ABS retention bracket so you don't forget that. And the next step before we get to the sway bar drop bracket is to put in your 2 lower ball joint bolts. You don't want to forget to Loctite these. They're Loctited from the factory with the blue Loctite. I use red. When you saw me take these off, you noticed the impact struggle a little bit. I would rather that than lose them going down the highway. So that is our next step. Part of final assembly, we'll be putting on the sway bar drop brackets. It doesn't only drop the sway bar, it actually shifts it forward about 1/2 inch. You can see here's where it originally bolts in. It's moving it to here. That keeps your sway bar from hitting your spring on your new coilover. On Toytec, they're actually labeled so you know which one is which. This is the right-hand side, which is passenger side of the vehicle, and that way is forward. So there's no mistake putting them on. They send you new hardware. This is one of those tools that I was pretending like we already had that we had to go get. It is just an Allen wrench, 8mm. Once these are in place, you bolt your sway bar back on the exact same way you took it off. Just this time it'll be going into these aluminum blocks instead of directly into your frame. We'll get back to do that in just one moment. All right, so once you get your sway bar drop brackets on, you'll put in one of your shorter bolts that comes with your lift kit. You have to hold your tongue just right to get these ones in. So I'm going to go on and I'm going to tighten down these 2 bolts all the way. I'm going to tighten down this last nut that we took off over here, and our sway bar will be effectively back in. The last and arguably most important step to any lift kit install, whether you're doing it at home or doing it in a shop, is to check your work, or have another set of eyes check your work. In this case, it'll be Ian checking over. But we go through and we check the upper bolts on the strut mount, the bracket bolts for the ABS lines, our lower shock bolts, our sway bar link bolt, all of our sway bar bolts here, which the 2 you put the bracket on with you can no longer get to, the 2 bolts here, your lower shock bolt, and of course the 2 lower ball joint bolts that we have Loctited back. Once those are checked over by 2 pairs of eyes, or yourself 2 to 4 or 19 times, you can start putting your tires back on and effectively call your front lift kit done. We're going to be moving on and doing the Toytec Superflex coils in the rear of this. We may or may not add that video, as it's literally just swapping springs. But as far as the fantastic new Boss 2.0 aluminum series coilover, this is it in its glory. We'll get some finished shots later and add to this video. Thank you for watching, and thank you to our sponsors at Toytec for a fantastic product.